Now, a good friend of the show and a man that I spent some time with in Iran just the other day is Glenn Diesen. He is the professor at the University of Southeastern Norway and editor at Russia in Global Affairs. And he's our first guest, I'm glad to say, this evening. Glenn, welcome to the show. All roads lead to Istanbul for tomorrow's talks, or do they? Are there going to be talks? Who's going to be talking, and what are they going to be talking about?
Well, yes, good to be on your program, George. Yes, good to see you again. Now, yeah, this is a great question. I think the reason why there's a lot of confusion around this is obviously because there's a lot of dishonesty. I think it's hard to see how they're approaching this as an honest broker. That is, after 3 years of boycotting all diplomacy, suddenly, the Europeans, imposed this ultimatum, and we need a sudden 30-day unconditional ceasefire, which means no political settlement. Zelensky says he will negotiate with the Russians, but only with Putin, and they have to meet in person, and they only have a few days to organize this. A lot of this seems dishonest, but again, I think a lot of it's also intended to show or to control the narrative, to suggest that Zelensky is the one who really wants peace. So forget about the last 3 years of not wanting to talk to the Russians, because the Russians will not comply with these demands. That is an unconditional 30-day ceasefire, or Putin meeting Zelensky on a short notice. That the Russians aren't interested in diplomacy. So I think this is the main reason why there's some confusion around this. But again, if they can meet at least some delegation from Russia and Ukraine face to face, I think this will be progress after 3 years of not talking to each other.
Well, Mr Lavrov is hardly an unimpressive stand-in, is he? He is the, I think, most senior foreign policy man, the most senior seasoned diplomat, probably in the world, but certainly in the conflict we're talking about. Why would the Ukrainians not want to talk to Mr Lavrov?
Well, there is no reason. And again, the idea that negotiations are done between two presidents, it doesn't really make much sense. Usually you would have a negotiation team, flesh out all the details, work out the main problems, and then you would have the political leadership perhaps come in towards the end for the handshakes and the official stuff. But indeed, it's often recognized that if you introduce two high-end diplomats early on, it could cause political problems, disruptions, to the extent that it would undermine negotiations. So this seems like a political show. It's political theater to control the narrative, signal to Trump, for example, that Zelensky does want to negotiate. This was a key reason why you had that big fight in the Oval Office, that Zelensky made it abundantly clear he didn't want to talk to the Russians. And now, of course, they have to sell it that the Ukraine really, really wants to talk to Russians, but it's Russia that doesn't want this, because whoever doesn't want to make peace with the other side will probably, get to face Trump's fury. This is the main idea. So it's theatrics, unfortunately.
Is Zelensky telling the truth when he says that under Ukrainian law, a law which he himself introduced, literally only he can negotiate, that no other official of Ukraine is legally entitled to?
No. And indeed, from the Russian perspective, they even question his legitimacy. They fear that if they sign anything with Zelensky, that this will be considered to be not valid later on, given that his presidential mandate has run out. But I think that this is also a reaction from Zelensky, because he fears for his legitimacy. Indeed, many people assume that the war will likely end with a regime change in Ukraine when the government collapses. So given that Trump has also previously, not at the moment, challenged the legitimacy of Zelensky, given that the Russians challenge his legitimacy, there is some concern. Also, now that the war is not going well, you will have some uprising either from the nationalists or the military, or even the public, which is less likely because they've been weakened. But nonetheless, there's a concern about the legitimacy. So it could be merely that Zelensky would like to elevate his own position, but it's also maybe a concern that someone will go over his head. But no, there's no reason why he should put himself at the center of this.
Well, it looks like, or sounds like, Professor, I made the right decision not traveling to Istanbul today. Although if it all comes good and Trump flies in from the Persian Gulf and peace breaks out, I'll have made the wrong choice. But it doesn't sound like that's going to happen. Can you help us with what is taking place right now in the southwest of Ukraine, with Hungary appearing to be on a war footing and Ukrainian drones being shot down in Hungarian territory?
Well, this, of course, it's very hard to read the situation this early, but there's no secret that there's some tensions between Ukraine and Hungary. And the main problem for Ukraine now, given the huge power of the nationalists since 2014, is not only that the nationalists are very anti-Russian in terms of seeking to nationalize and de-Russify Ukraine. They have also limited a lot of the rights of other minorities, the Hungarian being a key one. So for the Hungarians, they've been very, very worried about this for a long time. And instead of the EU hasn't backed them up, of course, they've taken the side of Zelensky against, well, one of their own. And also you have the Ukraine's disruption to Hungary's energy supplies. So there's a lot of tensions which have been growing. And it's also the assumption, at least, well, then you're speculating perhaps, but I do believe that if Ukraine will begin to fall apart, that Hungary might also claim some of these territories, which used to be a part of Hungary, which are populated by Hungarians, who they seem have been discriminated by under Kiev, not just Zelensky, but especially since 2014. So if Ukraine begins to unravel, it's worth noting that all of these neighbors, they are not living all in harmony. Indeed, it's quite possible that Poland would lay claims to cities such as Lavough or even Romania. You have some groups which lay claims to part of Ukraine. I know it's not a popular thing to say in the West, but Ukraine was to some extent built as an artificial state. If you see the territory it had and how it was put together. Now, why was it put together like this? Some argue this was on purpose to prevent nationalism, if you will, to put in different parts. But if it falls apart, it's quite possible that other countries will begin to go in and strip parts of it. And it's also worth noting that Hungary has been quite vocal that it does not want to fight this war against Russia, so it's opposing some of NATO's more belligerent posture. It's also been negative towards the European Union financing the war, and saying that they won't take a part of this. So Hungary is beginning to see more and more as a direct challenge, not necessarily just to Ukraine, but also to Zelensky himself. So, and given that both Orban as well as Fico have been essentially breaking with what the EU believed was the international isolation of Russia, the tensions have been growing for quite some time, you hear the Hungarians as well. They don't have anything kind to say about Zelensky anymore, and this goes both ways.
The Russians are very far from isolated nowadays, are they? You had, despite extraordinary pressure, the journey to Moscow last Friday for Victory Day parade by the Prime Minister of Slovakia and the President of Serbia, who got a hero's welcome on his return to Belgrade, standing ovations everywhere, massively popular, his decision to proceed to Moscow despite threats and even travel disruptions caused by European countries, albeit small ones, refusing to allow their presidential or governmental planes to fly over their territory. You've got Orban alongside, who wasn't in Moscow, but who takes roughly the same position on Ukraine. And we've got President Simeon to come in the upcoming Romanian elections. That's quite a cluster. That's 80 million people. That's more or less the population of Germany, which will be within the EU's theatre of operations, within NATO's theatre of operations, and which will be hostile to the European Union's prevailing orthodoxy on this subject.
Well, it's worth noting that this isn't an isolated incident of petty leaders who wants to prevent them from participating in the Victory Day commemoration in Moscow. This is a wider phenomenon, which is the whole idea that you shouldn't, that peace doesn't derive from mutual understanding and again, visiting each other, diplomacy. It's quite extraordinary that this is something now which isn't permitted. You see this among our political class. The fact that they didn't even pick up the phone and call Moscow for 3 years while all of these hundreds of thousands of men died on the battlefield. They did nothing. But they even took pride in this, that no, we don't talk to Russia. As Kaja Kallas would say, again, the EU foreign policy, or sorry, the let's call it chief of diplomacy, who doesn't believe in diplomacy, say, we don't talk to war criminals, so we don't talk to the Russians, but casually makes threats about breaking up the country. This whole idea that you don't talk to the opposing side. Not only is it enough that politicians do this, but they push this on journalists, on academics, that also you shouldn't, you don't talk to your opponent. This is a negative thing. War is weapons are the path to peace. The diplomacy is treasonous. So this is a very strange, this is a strange approach. And you see this now, of course, of all things. This shouldn't be that controversial to attend the memory of the Red Army's defeat of Nazi Germany. I thought, this could be a unifier, something to remind us we actually used to be on the same side, and again, used to. But no, I see this as being a key problem. But you mentioned a few of these countries now in Eastern Europe, from Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, where there's growing sentiments against the war. But you see this in Western Europe too. It's just that we call them radical left or right, but it's interesting that it's the center that has become quite radical. If you see Germany, AfD actually wants to restart diplomacy with the Russians to make peace with them. Now they're being criminalized. Le Pen also wants a more moderate position towards Russia, also criminalized. It's across the board. I think there's a failure to recognize the basic national interests of their own country. So you're creating now a huge political vacuum with new political forces emerging. And as you see now with the EU, they aren't sure how to react to this. So it goes from, again, criminalizing the opposition to blocking your airspace, or as with Orban when he went to Kiev and Moscow to try to start some diplomacy. They actually punished him elected leader in Europe simply because he didn't fall in line. It's a very dangerous path we're going down in Europe when all dissent, all opposition to this war must be punished and punished.
Yes, indeed. There is a new dichotomy today. Macron appeared to say that Ukraine can expect no more weapons from France, that their armory is empty, and that they would be endangering their own personal, individual security as a country by giving more. At the same time, the new German Chancellor, Herr Merz, declared that he intends to make the Bundeswehr, the German army, the most powerful army in Europe. Now, for people my age and people from countries like yours, the idea of a very powerful German army, the most powerful army in Europe, doesn't actually fall like music on the ears, does it?
No, and I think this is, I spoke to a German member of the EU Parliament. He was making the same point. The idea that the Western Europeans are now all, chummy and we wouldn't mind a powerful Germany. I think this would change if you see a very powerful German army, one that doesn't. We saw how a lot of opposition built up against the Germans when they were using their economic power through this round, or especially around the global financial crisis. If they begin to project their power more through military force, I think it's going to bring up some very bad memories indeed. So I think this is a very bad way to go. We're getting, again, it just shows how Germany has been turned on its head. Only a few years ago now, Germany was the country who had learned from the history. It wouldn't, resort that much to military force anymore. It was the economic engine of Europe. Now, of course, it's in economic decline. It's struggling. It's deindustrializing. What remains of its industries are being lured across the Atlantic with subsidies from the United States. And at this point, when they're going through economic crisis, they come up with this great idea of military Keynesianism. So let's just build weapons until we're wealthy. This is, really concerning stuff. And I think, but even they take the different approaches. That is, the Germans are still saying that Ukraine's path to NATO is irreversible, suggesting that there can't be any peace with Russia, as this is the core demand of the Russians. While from Macron, he's recognizing that there's not that much weapons left to be sent, and also even Ukraine realizes that they're not going to get all their territories back. So what are we doing here? We know that we lost the war. That is NATO's war on Russia. It's been lost. We ran out of weapons and we ran out of Ukrainians. And even though the situation goes from bad to worse every day we delay it, there's still no negotiations. There's nothing. And again, that's why I'm very critical of how the Europeans are framing this new peace effort. It's all nonsense, I think. This focus that has to be unconditional ceasefire. The whole idea is simply that that they don't want to discuss any political settlements. In other words, the conflict won't be solved. They're just going to buy some time so they can rebuild some industries, pump in some more weapons, possibly strengthen some defensive lines and prolong the war. It's quite maddening. Even if we could defeat the Russians, what exactly would this look like? How would you defeat the world's largest nuclear power in a struggle which Russia considers to be an existential threat? So no, I don't think a heavily militarized Germany is the solution that Europe really needs at this moment.